Sheila O'Neill, 445 2nd Street West and Blue Wing. Before I start, can I just get a point of clarification from Chairman Cribb?
Yes.
You said in the email that we should focus our presentation entirely on CEQA,
Yes.
and that the developers would be doing that. I didn't think that was CEQA. Do you want me to still stick with CEQA?
Well, as I said, we're going to get the most benefit because that is the only point of discussion. I mean, the decision-making
Right.
tonight.
But that presentation just wasn't CEQA.
Well, I mean, in terms of presenting the general project as well, I mean, so you can talk in general terms about the
Okay.
project. But I'm just saying that what I was trying to emphasize is that the decision that we'll make tonight is not going to, it's relative to staff's report
Okay.
and do we need additional studies?
Okay.
What are those studies? What the extent of those studies should be?
I think we'll be on
And-
the same page then. Yeah. All right, thank you. I'll begin. I'm Sheila O'Neill. I represent the group
Do you
called...
want to reset the timer for her? Thanks.
Okay, I represent the group Protect Sonoma, and David and I are going to do a little dance here to know when it's time to click to the next slide. So you're already on the next slide. We are a group of volunteers. We are not motivated by any dollars here. We originally began, our roots are in the North of Mission Neighborhood Association, which has been around for about 20 years. It originally was founded about 20 years ago when the neighborhood was all of a sudden rezoned mixed use rather than residential. The neighborhood association got together and fought that. I'll tell a little bit more about that. We're also the same group that was successful in shutting down the Rosewood Hotel that was planned to be up on what is now our gem, the Overlook Trail. And this group was able to shut that down. It went to a referendum on the ballot, and it was voted down by the citizens of Sonoma by 76% voted it down. We are like you. We're stewards for Sonoma. You're volunteers. You're appointed, but you're volunteers. You're doing this because you're passionate about ensuring that we have thoughtful, intelligent growth and development. We're your foot soldiers. We feel the exact same way. We're looking for thoughtful, intelligent growth and development. And we want to make sure that this site is developed in a way that is compatible with its surrounding, responsible, that it meets the general plan and the development code, and that it preserves the quality of life and the context of the land use. So what we're going to ask you today is to make sure that you help us protect this neighborhood, Sonoma's backyard, and that you help us make sure that we protect Sonoma. That's what we're asking for. Because Chairman Cribb and David Goodison had asked us to address CEQA, we really focused on CEQA. I'm learning a whole lot about CEQA, and I'm better for it. What we have here is a position where we're looking at tonight the initial review and the environmental impact report. So we're going to get into some details on that. Oh, David, you're a little behind. Sorry, my fault. Okay, keep going. We're going to be looking at the aesthetics, the cultural resources, the house materials, transportation and traffic, and as that applies to safety, land use and planning. David's report was spot on. Your goal as the planning commissioners, as the stewards of Sonoma, you have three possible outcomes tonight. You can possibly say, let's do the full environmental impact review right now. Or you can say, we need some further studies in a specific area before we can go forward with this EIR. Or you can reject this proposal at the outset and say it's not even appropriate. So for the aesthetics, the three-story buildings that are still in this proposal, they would have a serious potential to block the views of the hills. If I sit at the Mason Ave House patio, the porch, which I do quite often, and I look up towards those hills, that three-story building, 36 feet along the southern perimeter, would block entirely my view of the hills. And Sonoma's general plan states that Sonoma's small-town charm derives from the hillside backdrop and the agricultural lands that frame the city. In Sonoma's building code for the Northeast Planning Area, it says proposed structures shall not exceed a maximum of 2 stories or 30 feet. It also says that commercial and mixed-use structures should be compatible in scale, massing, and height to the residential development in the vicinity, and the architecture and design details should maintain a low-key residential flavor. Other planning areas say that 3-story is allowed if it's going to be used for residential, but the Northeast Planning Area has a stricter standard that does not apply. There are no 3-story buildings in our area, and this project is incompatible with the neighborhood. Cultural resources, historic preservation, a very important topic to Sonoma. It enhances our quality of life and gives a lot of pride to our locals, and it also ensures that our town is authentic and interesting and attractive to visitors. That's why they come to Sonoma, because they like the history. This project is within the Historic Overlay District, and it borders and could well be within the forthcoming Sonoma Historic Train District that is under review. And there's many people who believe that those cinder block houses on First Street East that are part of this parcel are excellent examples of mid-century modern architecture and should be preserved for future generations. Okay, transportation and traffic. Why? This project sits right between two very narrow streets, First Street East, Second Street East. Across them, you have Blue Wing Drive. There's no outlet anywhere. You go up those streets, you're stuck. You have to go through the intersection at the Mission. And as anybody who's lived in this town long enough knows, you go through that intersection on a busy Saturday, it's gridlock. This is an F intersection due to the traffic and pedestrians with no remedy. Okay, furthermore, we do believe that the traffic review has to take into account the variety of activities and the strange timing that these activities happen. I'm going to get into a little bit more details on that later, but this traffic review has to happen over multiple days and multiple times. We have a serious safety issue here with our Little Leaguers, with the bike path, and I'm going to get into more details on that. Okay, are we caught up? I'm on the CEQA land use. There we go. Excellent, David. Okay, from the staff report, they say that there's a potential conflict with applicable land use plans, and an analysis of project consistency with potential applicable general plans and policies is recommended. We totally agree. This reveals the project's fatal flaws as it is inconsistent with our town's general plan and development code. The general plan policy says mixed-use developments should be small-scale, local-serving commercial uses, provided it will be compatible with the surrounding development. This one is not. Next page. Now we're going to talk about all the activities that happen in this neighborhood and why the traffic study and the safety review are so critical here. This is truly our backyard, Sonoma's backyard. Next page. You can see the position of it there in the middle of our recreational area. Next page. We have Little League. 400 Little League players and their families will be descending on that ballpark for about 5 to 6 months of the year. We have the Vintage House, which has about 1,000 participants on a monthly basis. We have the Patch. We have Depot Park, which includes volleyball, bocce, petanque, picnics, gatherings. Next page. The Masonave House, which is a lovely treasure in the city, has a very limited event schedule because the city does not want the Masonave House events to impose too much of a burden on the neighbors. So it has a very limited schedule. So why would this be different? We have the bike path has about 50 to 60 users per hour in the middle of the week in the month of March. So let's say we've got 500 plus users in the middle of the week. We have a lot of people on that bike path, and that's just on a weekday. So there's a lot of safety issues with that. Next page. Okay, there you go, you're caught up. What else happens in this neighborhood? It truly is Sonoma's backyard. It's where we have the 4th of July, the Vintage Festival Parade. Little League happens there. Arnold Field, the Sonoma High School Sports, the Stompers, the Sonoma Film Festival, which will be there the weekend after this. And they have 1,000 attendees over a 5-day period, and that's where they're headquartered. We have the Valley of the Moon Nursery School with 30 nursery school kids and their families coming and going Monday through Friday. We have the Vintage House Senior Center, which not only has the daily traffic for the seniors, but it's also an event center. Depot Park, as I mentioned, the veterans activities, Friday Farmers Market, and the bike path. Next page. So this project is not your typical mixed-use site. It was a designation that was intended to accommodate uses that provided transition from commercial to residential districts. This isn't one of those sites. It's in the middle, smack dab in the middle of a residential district. Next page. In 1995-96, as I mentioned, our neighborhood association was started when the city council rezoned the entire area to be mixed use. The neighborhood freaked out and said, whoa, we don't want all these businesses here. The city council realized their errors and they decided to change everything back to residential except for those properties that had existing commercial businesses. At that time, Mike Moore, the planning director, who was David Goodison's boss and predecessor, said they understood that people were concerned about the mixed-use classification, and he came out and said, the proposed changes should make it clear that businesses such as restaurants or shops, which would change the character of the neighborhood, need not apply. Next page. Then the Sonoma City Council ordinance came out, 96-4. Whereas the aforementioned area is predominantly residential in character and the representatives of the newly formed North of Mission Neighborhood Association have expressed their concerns about the possible encroachment of intensive commercial uses. They wanted to make sure that it was clear. It's the intent of the city council not to allow the encroachment of commercial uses that would alter the existing residential character of the area. This was passed by a unanimous vote on March 13th, 1996, and it's never been repealed. Next one, David. In 2003, the Development Code was created. The goal of the Development Code was to build on this ordinance that I just read you, and the general concept was that you can do with a piece of, whatever you do with a piece of property depends on the order of scrutiny. First, how's the property zoned? Second, what planning area, as Larry Barnett mentioned, does this property lie within? This means that a mixed-use property on Broadway is very different than a mixed-use property in the North of Mission Neighborhood Association. And there's some more information there for you. Next page. So the hotel land use and how that fits in to the Northeast planning area. The emphasis of mixed-use development should be residential with some small-scale office, bed and breakfast, or other compatible commercial land uses. A large hotel, restaurant is not compatible. And it does specifically mention a form of lodging. The Development Code defines a bed and breakfast as 5 rooms or less. Not 30, 5 rooms or less. So this project is not compatible with the neighborhood or with our own general plans. Next page. So the desired future. It's to be used by the decision-making body. These aren't vague goals. These are very specific goals, what we want to do with our neighborhood. It's outlined. We just need to follow it. Next one, David. Next page. So again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. We have a couple of choices here. We can go full scale with an environmental impact review. Or we can take our time and say, there's a few areas we need to study a little bit further here before we can take that leap and do an environmental impact review and waste the resources of our staff on a project that is ill-fated. Next page. So here's the CEQA review process, and you guys can't read it, but there's a point in there where you could decide, does this apply to CEQA or not? Next page. And the thing is, CEQA has an exception that says, CEQA doesn't apply to projects that a public agency rejects or disapproves. So if you're not going to approve the project, you can say that there's no CEQA required on this one. Next page. Case law study to back us up and show you that we're not just blowing air. We've studied this. And the next page. So the FSC project is dead on arrival. What we're asking you to do is postpone the EIR review, postpone all reports except the report determining the consistency with the general plan and the development code. Hold a public forum to consider the above report and get the input from your constituents. And based on that, we are confident you're going to reject this project based on its clear incompatibility and inconsistency with our town's governing documents. Thank you. And I have a minute to spare.
Excellent job. Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of the Protect Sonoma presenter? No.